Okay, so I'm expecting this to be to further corroborate the suspicions that a lot of people have had about Twitter being corrupted in the extreme towards far left tendencies. Um, and it's this is really crazy that Project Veritas managed to pull this off. So, like, get access to this. I wonder if Elon gave them access, or if they got it through some other way. Like, I wonder if Elon wanted this to be public, or what. Let's see.
We have a lot to cover, a ton to cover. So I am going to ask you a question that usually gets asked at the end, which is, will you come back for a part 2 at some point, if there are things that we don't cover?
Yeah, absolutely. What happened?
Okay, great. Okay, so you have some breathing room. So I really do see this as the beginning of a conversation, obviously with the company at large, and then also with teams and leaders over the next coming weeks and months and beyond. So we're just getting started. Okay, so
they want to be able to get their way, which is why I think they said that, so that they can, try to use their entitled mentality to basically require that they get what they want by gaslighting and implying that their way of doing things is the only morally sound way of doing things, the only virtuous way of doing things, or maybe even more precisely, their way of thinking about problems is the only correct and ethical approach. But of course, because Elon is so hyper coherent, he will not allow any of that to take place. This is obvious. This has to be leaked, right? Because Project Veritas has their stamps all over this footage. So this was surely leaked.
I love Twitter. Yeah, so I want to be clear about that. I love Twitter. Yeah.
Let's watch this get political. I'm willing to bet this gets political because they make it so. Even though free speech should not be political whatsoever.
The best forum for communicating with a lot of people simultaneously.
If Twitter was ideal, then Elon Musk would not have a reason to buy it. But the fact that he wants to buy it means that he sees that there is significant room for improvement, and that improvement is worth his time. And we know that his biggest objection is that it does not value free speech as the public virtual town square, which it is.
Now, the free speech stuff does need to be, it's free speech within the context of the law. So I'm definitely not suggesting that we, just flout the law, because we'll get shut down in that case. And I think there's also there's freedom of speech and freedom of reach. And freedom of speech is one thing, because like anyone could just go into the middle of Times Square right now and say anything they want. They just walk into the middle of Times Square and deny the Holocaust. Okay, you can't stop them. They will just do that. But that doesn't mean that needs to be promoted to millions of people. So I think people should be allowed to say, pretty outrageous things that are within the bounds of the law, but then they don't, it doesn't get amplified. It doesn't get, a ton of reach. And I think an important goal for Twitter would be to try to include as much of the country, as much of the world as possible. So currently, it's a relatively small percentage of the world that is, and it is a small percentage of the world that is on Twitter. If you say like daily active users, if you assume that that's say 200 million, you've got 8 billion people on Earth. That's 7.8 billion who are not on Twitter.
It's going to be very important for the code to be publicly sourced so that everyone can read it and see what is determining the effect of what is affecting the reach that he's referring to. As long as it is fair, then I think that could have no issues. But the problem is someone, of course, deciding what should get an amount of reach, independent of how many people would find it appealing otherwise.
I'm going to have a couple of follow-up questions on this specifically, but given you mentioned trust, I wanted to ask one of the employee questions around trust. They said Twitter has a lot of incredible, smart, talented people. What can we do to earn your trust, and what are you going to do to earn ours?
I think trust is as trust does. I tend to be extremely literal in what I say. So, aspirationally, one does not need to read between the lines. One can simply read the lines. So the things that I've said about Twitter, I think, need to happen in order for it to be, to really go to the next level. I mean, I think the potential is there for Twitter to have be accessible to an order of magnitude more people, and for a lot more people to find it useful. Not currently, I guess it would be 4% of the world or something like that.
This is not a sales call, so that's a very arrogant question, because they do not have the leverage. Elon Musk has the leverage, so he does not have to prove himself to them. They hypothetically and practically should be proving themselves to him, or they would not have a job. So that question supposes a level of leverage that would only exist given some sort of extreme social equity that is not desirable and also doesn't exist, which of course is probably just part of the rotten culture that they have, which has been described as by employees that work there, with caught on hidden cameras as communist. So it doesn't surprise me, but that question is kind of off base, which is why Elon was a little bit taken aback. What exactly do you mean by that? Because that question doesn't really make sense.
I don't know, it's 4 or 5% of the world.
You should be able to immediately have the respect of people if you just do the correct thing. So if you, if you do the correct thing and someone doesn't like it, then they are therefore not helpful in doing the right thing. And he's oriented at performing at capitalism and growing Twitter. That's the goal. So anyone that doesn't agree with that is actually hurting the company, and therefore getting that person's respect would be a fool's mission.
Well, optimistically, is finding Twitter useful, and maybe 50%.
So he's just reiterating, well, I plan to do these things, so therefore it's the right thing to do.
On the world could find Twitter useful. So I want to take whatever actions would lead to that, and I'm very much it's I wouldn't say essentially a trust thing. It's if somebody's getting useful things done, then that's great. But if they're not getting useful things done, then I'm okay, why are they at the company?
Exactly. That's literally what I just said. Right. So he's basically telling them, right, so you either serve the mission or you're not wanted here. Trust has nothing to do with it. Trust is an element that is trust is an element to interpersonal relationships that is more familial, and designed. That's an element for interpersonal relationships. It's not really an important element for companies as much as doing the right thing in the game of capitalism. It's not irrelevant, but it's much more important that people just perform at doing the right thing. But we've learned that they don't really care about making money from the Twitter employee that was caught on a hidden camera saying they don't really care about making money and operate very, they operate in a communist fashion. So, see, he's a capitalist coming into this swamp of a situation where only a few people are making extraordinary amounts of money, and everyone else isn't really concerned with Twitter making money. It's more so just a collective of social justice. That's basically what Twitter is right now. Just an incoherent soup of people prioritizing social justice and equity, not caring about the tenets of capitalism or coherence. So basically, they're useless.
So it's really just we need to improve the core technology,
right? Exactly.
Improve the design, and
that's all that matters. Who cares if somebody trusts or not? That question exists on the wrong axis of analysis. Actually, that's a concise way of thinking about it.
Yeah. So
trust emerges from that.
Yeah, I mean, trust. Yes, it's not like I'd say trust is not exactly the. It's like, you know, if somebody's getting stuff done, great, I love them, and if they're not, I don't like them, and I do not love them. It's pretty straightforward.
Is obviously core and central to our work at Twitter, both our employees and the customers that we serve. You've been vocal on a variety of different topics and issues that relate to inclusion and diversity. Can you talk about both your views and also your commitment to creating a diverse and inclusive workplace and also a service where everyone can feel included and safe?
Yeah, I mean, well, to be clear, you know, if everyone talks about that's said about Twitter as a whole, like, there's 8 billion people in the world. There's sort of, I'm told there's 200 million, you know, daily users of Twitter. That's a 7.8 billion person gap. So I think we really want to have, you know, I don't know, at least 1 billion people on Twitter, maybe more. As many people as we can possibly get on Twitter. So that, I think, is the most inclusive definition of inclusiveness. It's like all humans. So, you know, that's important.
That's such a competent answer. Oh my God, I wonder how she's going to cope with that.
You know, from a company standpoint, you know, I believe in a sort of strict meritocracy. So whatever, you know, whoever's doing great work, great. You know, they get more responsibility and authority, and that's that.
What an amazing answer. Let's see if she's triggered.
And I know you mentioned in some of our conversations about your I&D team at Tesla. We have an amazing I&D team here at Twitter as well. So content moderation, go back to a number of the things that you said earlier. So this is one I'll take verbatim. So you've spoken a lot about the importance of free speech. Let's start with the U.S., where we have a strong tradition around this. And you touched on this earlier. A lot of what...
That's super interesting and should not be glossed over, because this is a window into the way they operate and think about things. She said a strong tradition. She did not say an inalienable right. She said a strong tradition. A tradition is like a holiday. Tradition is like the fact that you put up a Christmas tree before Christmas, or cook turkey on Thanksgiving. Some people don't eat turkey on Thanksgiving. Some people have chicken instead, or order out, or eat at a restaurant. But so cooking turkey on Thanksgiving is a strong tradition. Most Americans do that. Okay. Free speech is not like that. Free speech is enshrined in the law. It's not a suggestion, and an inalienable human right as put forward by our Constitution, which, of course, if you extrapolate this, they don't look at the Constitution that way. And Twitter's run out of a very liberal city. The people that work there are overwhelmingly liberal and do not look at free speech as an inalienable right that cannot be changed or moved. They look at it as a strong tradition. Not everyone is required by law to put up a Christmas tree at Christmas time. There are Jews, there are, atheists, or people that do not do that. There are people that travel instead. Not everyone puts up a Christmas tree, not everyone eats a turkey, but everyone has to allow for free speech, or they are breaking the most sacred law of the land. So these people, if you were to go further with it, and I'll just say it, these people have disdain for such things, because it gets in the way of their agenda. It challenges them in ways they are weak, and it challenges them in ways they cannot stand up to the pressure, and that's very clear. And so they don't take it seriously. And those words were chosen carefully. That wasn't an accident. The fact that she said that.
What's called lawful but awful speech is allowed here in the United States, right? Animal abuse, footage, doxing, videos of sexual violence, etc. So allowing this type of content, obviously.
No, incorrect. Animal abuse is against the law. Doxing is also against the law. What?
Earlier.
And awful is subjective. So what this person considers awful might be someone saying, I support DeSantis for 2024, for instance, to millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of people, that is not awful. To millions and millions and millions and millions of people, that is considered awful. So that statement is self-serving because she can define it however she feels fit conveniently. Again, not an objective standard, which is what Elon really is going to bring to this whole situation.
Continue on the journey. What awful speech is allowed here in the United States, right? Animal abuse, footage, doxing, videos of sexual violence, etc. So allowing this type of content.
Oh yeah, sexual violence. No, it's not. So false.
Content obviously could cause harm and make Twitter unusable for the broad audience that you're trying to reach. What is your approach to this type of content that's sort of legal but problematic as it relates to people actually using this?
Problematic is a term which I can tell you has been coined by the liberals and far leftists to basically just mean anything that they don't agree with. And the reason it's the far left that has coined this is because they have control over the education system, which is where I first heard this term, at a very, very, very liberal private high school that I went to. As a matter of fact, Elon Musk has one of his children at this high school. So it's a good high school, and I heard this term there, problematic, where anything that is not, how do I say this? Anything that does not adhere to all the presuppositions of a given ideology can be considered problematic if you are, quote, woke enough. So if you say, like, for instance, one time I said Eskimos, and someone said, that's actually a problematic term. I was like, what? I'd never heard that before. Eskimos are the people that live up north, like really far north in igloos and such. I've been calling them that my entire life when I talk about them, and they're like, no, it's Inuit. But not all Eskimos are Inuits, or not all people that live in igloos are Inuit, so like it's incorrect. But that didn't matter. It was just problematic because it was a category, and the far left tries to disintegrate all categories. So I'm just being very, very detailed about how I responded to things she says.
Service. How do you think about this tension?
As I said earlier, really,
you should just look at her and say, "You are not virtuous." Next question. Imagine if you said that.
I think we should allow people to say what they want, post what they want within the bounds of the law. But that's different from them being able to reach people who don't want to be reached with that content. So if that content is offensive, then to people, those people will simply stop using Twitter. So it's important to
you can control who you follow. So this isn't really that big of a deal right now. Like, you kind of have to seek out. I just started using Twitter very recently. You basically have to seek out people that disagree with you, which I enjoy doing, to really see anything truly offensive. But besides the trending category, like in the trending category, you'll see things that maybe you disagree with. But besides that, you do have to like seek it out yourself, because you control who you follow, and the algorithm shows you basically what it predicts you want to look at. Instagram does the same thing in a different way,
Twitter as attractive as possible, and really that means not showing people content that they would find hateful or offensive or that they would find boring is not good. So we don't even want them to see boring content. Unless we were talking about TikTok last night, and TikTok obviously does like a great job of making sure you are not bored. It does like feel like ADD, but like next level. But TikTok does a great job of making you not bored. I do find some of the videos offensive, I think, but they're not boring. So the folks we are like, how do we ensure people have content that they find entertaining and engaging and interesting, such that they want to keep using Twitter and use it more. So that's uh, that's essential to the growth of the service.
And one of our employees asked about sort of people who use Twitter having the right and the ability to filter out content that they don't want to see. I think this gets to exactly what you're pointing to.
I mean, to be clear, it's like the standard is much more than not offending people. The standard should be that they're very entertained and informed. You could not offend someone, but you also bore them and show them a bunch of content that they don't find interesting, and then they will not use the service, or they will use.
You can see the difference between the way he's looking at it, which truly has the interests of the customer in mind, versus how she's looking at it, which has the mirage, which she's pretending has the interests of the customer in mind, but in reality is just serving her. In reality is just serving the equity and social justice narrative that Twitter has been obsessed with. This becomes obvious through a somewhat passive process for Elon, because he applies scrutiny so easily, and he applies such a rigorously reasonable and first principled scrutiny to everything that he says that we can immediately see that she is not actually concerned about the experience of the customer. She's concerned about whether or not people see things that contradict the narrative that she cares about and that Twitter cares about, which we have heard through other Project Veritas efforts, hidden cameras, interviews, etc., is extremely far left, very social justice, very equity-based. So, and you can immediately just tell that, because Elon said, well, we should also be concerned about people being bored, basically, because he's thinking about this in terms of first principles. So, in some ways, I'd say that probably someone being bored on the platform is even worse than them being offended, because at least if they're offended, they're feeling something. And also, people will engage with things that they are offended by. So, but she's not concerned about that, because, well, her intentions have betrayed her position.
Use it less. That's why I use the example of TikTok, where they just hone the algorithm to be as engaging as possible. And I think we want to also hone it to be as engaging as possible in a different way. I think, where that's like TikTok's interesting, but like you want to be informed about like serious issues as well. I think Twitter, in terms of like serious issues, can be a lot better in informing people about serious issues. Yeah. I do think it's important that there be, if there are two sides to an issue, it's important to represent, if there are multiple opinions, but, and just make sure that we're not sort of driving a narrative, but that we give people an opportunity to understand the various sides of issues. Most issues in the world are complex. They don't boil down to a simple, this is 100% good and this is 100% bad. So I think it would have a more informed public if people were presented with.
That's going to trigger a lot of people, because a lot of people want to believe that one side is completely morally virtuous and the other side is completely evil and reprehensible, which of course is reprehensible and immoral position to hold, but that doesn't matter so long as they can perpetuate that false belief.
Multiple sides to an issue.
One point I just want to go back to on sort of the law and sort of how that impacts content and moderation. As we think globally around the world, there are some countries, right, that have laws that limit speech, and sometimes actually use these laws to silence disagreement with the government, etc. You were talking about different points of view. So Twitter is historically focused on doing what we can do to enable people everywhere to have their voices. How do you think about that as it relates to, again, like the local laws and what that means?
Like Ukraine or Russia, maybe?
Well, I mean, I'm in favor of doing, of going as far as the law will allow us. If the law, if say Twitter employees would get arrested in the country if we didn't adhere to the law, then we obviously must adhere to the law or exit the country or something. So
Again, it's just so logical and coherent. I wonder, when you hear an answer like that is so logical and coherent, you wonder what the person was expecting to hear. Well, what you realize is I think that the person was expecting, or maybe even subliminally hoping to hear, something irrational or something that they could thoughtlessly improve. But that's such a coherent reply that, like, it makes you think, what was she expecting to hear? We must adhere to the laws or we'll be arrested. If the cost is too high, we must exit the country. Like, it's so rational.
But I mean, as much as we can enable people to have a voice and to speak their mind, I think we want to do that. Yeah.
And I know we talked about this as well last night about the teams doing this work and sort of your desire to connect with those teams and sort of understand sort of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And I think that would be hugely productive across the board, both ways. Can we talk briefly about
this person's not trustworthy? I wouldn't trust this person. This person seems to be gripped by some sort of mental adherence that's not serving her very well.
your political views? How, if at all, do your political views play into the leadership of the companies that you currently run? How would it affect Twitter, if at all?
Well, my political views, I think, are moderate, at least as would be, as if you said, like, what is the center of the normal distribution of political views in the country? I think I'd be pretty close to the center. I've voted Democrat every election until this recent one this week, and then I voted for Mayor Flores, who is a Republican, but she is Mexican American, and I thought a good candidate and worth voting for. So, but I'm in favor of moderate politics, but allowing people who have relatively extreme views to express those views within the bounds of the law. So that's as I said publicly, I think if let's say the far left 10% and far right 10% were equally upset on Twitter, then that would probably be a good outcome.
I want to just talk about our business for a minute. You've spoken about incentives that the ad business creates for services like Twitter. What role does advertising play in the future of your business plan for the company?
You can tell that she didn't like that answer because the right answer, according to her, would be all liberal agendas are morally virtuous and superior, and all conservatives are white supremacists. Like that's what she'd like to hear. And we know this because they've literally confessed to being like alt-left, like communist and socialist. And it's not surprising if you understand and know the part of the world that they operate in. It's not surprising, okay? Like, I live in Hollywood. I've lived in different parts of Los Angeles. I've been around the United States. Like, there are areas and pockets where people are far, far, far more liberal, like by 5 times, 10 times more so than just like the average person that lives in California. And the average person that lives in California is, a little bit left of center anyway. So left of true center, at least. So
I wanted to stay on the product. I know, you did touch upon this earlier, but it's a recurring question around the authentication piece. In terms of you're saying you want to authenticate all humans. So just to sort of double click into that, balancing this with those who benefit from anonymity, right, from safety perspective, especially, for example, human rights activists and marginalized communities. So it's sort of, can you just clarify again and speak to that?
Why would you bring up activists and marginalized communities randomly? What?
In terms of you're saying you want to authenticate all humans. So just
authenticate all humans, so there are no scams or bots. Okay, what the fuck did she say?
To sort of double click into that, balancing this with those who benefit from anonymity, right, from safety perspective, especially, for example, human rights activists and marginalized communities. So it's sort of...
What? So she's saying people of color can't share who they are because they're in danger in America? Are you kidding me? What a ridiculously stupid thing to say. Oh my god. I mean, now, if it's not been obvious to you, you now understand that they are, like, radically left. So, it's just obvious, I guess, now.
Can you just clarify again and speak to that, sort of that tension and...
What tension? Black people can't put themselves on the internet because then people will know. They'll know. And if they know, bad things happen. We all know what happens when Terry posted that on Facebook. Okay, so OBS crashed in the middle of my joke, but it's okay. Whatever. This person's radical.
So it's sort of, can you just clarify again and speak to that, sort of that tension and how you think about those groups specifically? Anonymity is sort of core to how the service.
I don't think it's necessary for someone to use their real name. So if one, say, does a payments-based authentication, I think it should be okay to not use your real name on Twitter. So Twitter would know would know who you are, at least from a payment standpoint, but you would not have to state your real name or anything. That's obviously important.
I can't say that joke on YouTube.
If someone has different political views from their manager, let's say, then they don't really want to, get crosswise there, and so that it would be better for them to, have a pseudonym on Twitter. But it could still be back-end authenticated. And like I said, at no point would I suggest that you have to be authenticated in order to use Twitter. It's just that it would just be a prioritizing of authenticated comments and actions on Twitter over unauthenticated in order to combat the sort of bots and trolls. And essentially, it needs to be much more expensive to have a troll army. Whereas right now, it's basically very inexpensive to have 100,000 fake Twitter accounts. About alien stuff. Because people really think. To be clear, I've seen no evidence. I've seen no actual evidence for aliens.
Okay.
I get asked that a lot, and I think I know, and I've not seen anything yet.
Okay, you've heard it here, everybody. Question about Twitter. When you look 5 to 10 years from now, what do you consider successful for yourself in acquiring the company and for all of us in the work that we do? What does success look like?
Yeah, so I think success would be a substantial increase in daily active users. I don't know, like I said, if can we get daily active users over 1 billion? That would be,
Given a set of first principles that adheres to capitalism and meritocracy, that question is a little bit strange. Because if she were to ask 10 different people that question, if the 10 different people are trying to best serve the world, they would all have the same answer to that question. Meaning that she should be able to predict what his answer is given what he's already told her. Which just, I think, really frames the fact that she is not using the most coherent set of presuppositions at her disposal, and instead is choosing to operate from a less than intellectually robust place. If that makes sense. Intellectually robust being reason-based, rational, actually coherent analysis that follows common sense and is objectively true in serving reality, is not orthogonal to reality. Incoherent thinking would be the belief that communism could work, or that equity is a good thing, or that socialism is a good thing, or that capitalism is a construction of white supremacy. These are all examples of beliefs that run orthogonal to reality, and as such are incoherent. So that's just to expand upon what I mean by incoherent a little bit.
I would say my philosophy is one of curiosity, of trying to understand the nature of the universe in as much as is possible to understand. So in order to understand the nature of the universe, we must expand the scope and scale of consciousness and extend the life of consciousness. I guess, broadly speaking, would be, has Twitter meaningfully improved the strength and longevity of civilization?
I would say the number one way Twitter can do that is just by facilitating dialogue in a virtual town square. To keep it succinct, I think that's what it is, because there's no way to discover what truth is besides having ideas clash and go to war with each other, given that nobody is perfect or has a perfectly high resolution understanding of a given situation. There's no way to facilitate the understanding of truth besides doing that. Even when you're thinking to yourself, you might say to yourself, oh, well, I'm not having a dialogue with anyone. No, incorrect. You actually are. If you think about an idea, you are imposing a avatar for a set of ideas, presuppositions, maybe even, if you're really good at it, a narrative, and going to war with the narrative, and clashing ideas together and seeing what stands up afterwards. So I think Twitter could it's definitely poised to facilitate that process very well. And the number one danger to that would be ironically, the intolerance coming from the left. I say ironically, of course, because they tout themselves as the tolerant group, supposedly. But if they're truly tolerant, then they would not try to deplatform or silence people. Because, again, I can't emphasize this enough, the only way to create a higher resolution idea, the only way to get closer to truth, is to have people disagreeing voluntarily. That's what it is. So I think Twitter can do that.